Everything's bigger in Texas. How often have you heard that? Well, let's face it, it's pretty much true. And it's often stated as a point of pride. We've got the biggest trucks, the largest stakes, the widest highways. It takes all day long to get from one end of Texas to the other. Texas! And yet, there are cases where that size might work against us, at least a little bit. Case in point, perhaps, governing. Is it just a lot harder to pull off when you've got to cover so many people and so much land? Let's talk it over now with Eddie Weller, director of the Honors Program and a professor of history at San Jacinto College, and Paul Brace, chair of legal studies in the Department of Political Science at Rice University. Eddie, Paul, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
And as we chat, we welcome you to our conversation. Are there ways in which you think efforts to govern, from schools to cities to the state itself, we just try to cover too much ground all at once? Do you think that's the case? Let us know at talk@houstonmatters.org. You can call or text us at 713-440-8870. You can comment on our video stream on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. And Eddie, let me start with you.
All right.
And let's just talk about the sheer size of Texas itself. How did we get here and end up with so much land?
Well, first, we are enormous, and you have to keep that in mind. I always pull up, if you ever want to read information on that, look at the Texas Almanac, the oldest ongoing publication. That goes back to the 1840s. That's the Bible for size and the like. Texas is 267,000 plus square miles. Put that in perspective. France is 248,000. Germany, 138,000. Spain, 195,000. By area, we're much larger than these nations are on there. Our population's not as big, but it's half of what theirs is. So it is just huge. I always, to give my students an understanding, I say, do you realize if you live in El Paso, you're closer to Los Angeles than you are to Texarkana? But on the other hand, if you're in Texarkana, you're closer to Chicago than you are to El Paso.
Wow. Was it hard to govern in the horse and buggy days?
Well, there was a lot less government. And so perhaps not, they didn't think about it that way. They didn't, as long as you delivered the mail and you had justice, you had judges and courts like that, the rest of the stuff they didn't worry about nearly as much. That's more, as we have urbanized, it's become difficult. Think about how hard it is just in the triangle of San Antonio, Austin, Houston, DFW, how many people that is. You've got over in East Texas, an area bigger than many states. In West Texas, bigger than many states. South Texas, bigger than many states. And so what works in one area may not work well in the other. And completely different ideas on what's appropriate. Texas is not monolithic. We are very, very different.
Yeah, you shared a map with me pointing out what Texas looks like in comparison to Europe. And it's bigger than many countries, not just states, right?
One of my favorite, when the 1928 Democratic Convention was in Houston, they did a picture of Texas, and they put U.S. states in it. And I always thought it was funny. Kentucky was upside down and in Big Bend area. But it was over, the people there were like, oh, in 1928, they're just now learning how big Texas is. I'm thinking, oh, we've been dealing with that. Now, how we got here is kind of interesting, too. We start out, if you think of Texas pre-revolution, 1835-36, most would have said, go to the Nueces River and then eastward. And that's really it. After the battles are fought, the Mexican army is going to retreat south of the Rio Grande. Now, they're doing that, leaving a buffer zone between, sort of a no man's land between. But because of that, Texans will always claim the Rio Grande. Well, we can claim what we want. We never controlled it. But then you get the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, and President Polk, he sends Zachary Taylor to the north bank of the Rio Grande, saying that's all Texas. Of course, that leads to shooting, leads to a war. When the U.S. wins the war, they say, oh, well, the Rio Grande has to be the border. Well, that means Albuquerque's in Texas, Santa Fe is in Texas, Isleta, the area around El Paso, is in Texas. And none of that had ever been part of Texas on there. And so we get this, that's that giant picture of Texas that's bigger than we see today. That's only there for a few years. In the Compromise of 1850, we get our present-day borders. and that was going to be the 100th meridian coming down. Originally, they were talking about to the Pecos River, from the Pecos River to the Rio Grande, but there's a settlement near El Paso, and they said, wait, we're Texans, let us in. So they drew a line just north of that settlement. That's why you've got that squared off point. It goes due east until it runs into the 100th meridian.
Okay. Well, and even still, we still have land that covers a heck of a lot of territory. Paul Brace, let's bring you into this. Bigger can mean all sorts of things, as Eddie Weller alluded to. It's not just land. It could also be a reference to population. How does the sheer number of people in Texas create complications?
Well, Texas is big, and as Eddie points out, it's been big for a long time. In the modern era, you could say it has its own gravitational pull, and that's why people keep moving there. But the reality is employers move there. And why do they move there? Well, it's a low tax, limited government state, which is attractive to many employers. And that's, I guess, the good news is Texas and our governors frequently like to comment on the rapid growth in Texas. The bad news is when we look at how Texas compares to other states in the modern era, it doesn't look as good. It might grow jobs and its population is growing, but it ranks, for instance, 32nd out of 50 on healthcare. Educational attainment is the lowest in the United States. Poverty, 36th out of 50. Uninsured rate, 50th out of 50. Crime, 40th out of 50. So on the one hand, it's big and it's attractive and employers move there and workers move there. But the downside of that is it might have become too large to govern effectively when we look at these metrics. The institutions Texas hasn't adapted to its growing scale and complexity. We have huge regional disparities, particularly between urban and suburban and exurban rural populations. And sometimes it might be said that our central authorities overreach without devolving powers appropriately to, for instance, counties like Harris, that are larger than some states, but have very little autonomy politically within the state of Texas.
Yeah, Eddie Weller's been doing a lot of aggressive nodding as you've been talking.
Yeah, what I find interesting is how in Texas we think bigger's better on certain things, but then, oh no, we're not going to let the local government take control of something. We're going to instead rule it from Austin. That goes against many of the practices that had always been put in place in Texas. So let's say over the last, I'd say 40 years, my late wife worked for the state legislature out of Fort Worth, and she used to joke about it. Yep, we got another Harris County bill coming up. We have another Harris County bill coming up. And that doesn't fly right. And as big as Texas is, you'd think we'd concentrate on what helps everybody or hurts everybody, and we have a tendency to forget that.
Has that always been the case? Has it always been this focus on centralized control of the state government, sometimes at the expense of these local municipalities?
Actually, not forever. In fact, there's an old saying that some people say goes back to before the Civil War: no person's life, liberty, or property is safe as long as the Texas legislature is in session. And so there's always been a bit of a distrust of state government and what they're going to do. What's happened, urban areas are now seen as being out of sync with the rest of Texas, and so that's why the legislature, which is still fairly well controlled by more rural areas, and that's an ongoing problem.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're talking with San Jacinto College's Eddie Weller and Paul Brace from Rice University about whether the fact that everything's bigger in Texas is always such a good thing. And we welcome your thoughts on it at talk@houstonmatters.org. You can call or text us at 713-440-8870. You can also comment on our video stream on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. Billy has done that and asks, is it true Texas can still split into 5 states? Paul, can you describe this?
Well, technically, yes. In the annexation agreement, it is that Texas could divide up into as many as 5 states. But it takes also, it's not just Texas deciding it. Congress has to agree to it as well. And I'm not sure a lot of states will want, we don't want 5 Texas. That could really be too much on there. The only time it was ever truly tried was during Reconstruction. And the Reconstruction government wanted to split Texas in half based along the Colorado River. Everything east and north of the Colorado would have been East Texas, and then West Texas, everything south and west of it. And the idea was at that time, the eastern part would in fact stay pretty much controlled by the Democrats when Reconstruction ended, but the western part could probably be controlled by the Republicans, or that was their thought. They had a better chance of it. It died. Texans didn't want to split. We didn't want to be smaller on there, and I think that would still happen. Now, you sometimes see the same people say, well, and you see the bumper stickers, Texas secede. Can't do that. That we decided in the Civil War. You don't have that right. But the splitting up, if Congress were to agree to it, could happen.
Paul Brace, years ago on this program, we talked about during the period of Brexit, whether or not we could ever see Houston walk away from Texas and sort of hex it. And I'm curious what you think politically would happen if we ever saw regional splits, as unlikely as that scenario could be. If we ever were to divide Texas up into regions, would we see dramatically different political leanings from one geographic part of Texas to the next?
Oh, certainly. I mean, the divide is urban versus rural mostly. Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso. If we're looking for elements of blue Democrats in the state of Texas, we go to the cities. We get outside those cities into the suburbs and exurbs, and particularly the rural areas, it's deeply red. The state is very red right now politically, but it would be even redder without those urban areas.
Eddie, some have argued over the years that the Houston Independent School District itself is too large and should be broken up. What are some benefits and liabilities to having the largest school district in Texas here in Houston?
Well, one of the benefits could be the funding. You could have better funding as you're bringing in all of Houston as opposed to the San Antonio area, which is butchered up into very small districts where some have good money, good funding, and others, like Edgewood, have very little. So that can be a good size. Anything that gets that large in education is difficult to control. It's difficult to understand. And you've got Houston has so many different communities within it. It makes it difficult to say what works in this neighborhood may not work over here in another neighborhood or at a different school. Because Houston's so hard, it's hard for so large. It's hard for any one person, a superintendent, to be able to know all of those areas. And Houston doesn't work well with one size fits all, which usually for me was always one size fits none.
Paul Brace, anything you'd add to that?
No, I would agree completely that governance units can become so big they have a hard time being responsive to local constituencies. On the other hand, when local constituencies completely dominate processes and policies, sometimes they discriminate against local minorities. And so there's a case to be made for expanding the control to be more uniform across geographical entities. But that's a debate that we could have for a long, long time.
Ultimately, Paul, should Houston be as effective day to day as it is as a major metro area that is so very large?
Houston is rightfully proud as a city that works on so many different levels. It is I think it still is the most diverse city in the United States, large city. It functions. I'm not going to argue for everyone because I know some people will feel it doesn't function well, but by most metrics, it functions quite well. And so Houston has a lot to be proud of. I have a friend, you were talking about homelessness earlier. I have a friend who's an expert on homelessness, and I asked him how cities compare. He said Houston does really well on homeless compared to other cities. And I don't want to minimize the duress suffered by the homeless in Houston. But when we look at some other cities, Houston's doing a lot better. So Houston gets some things right, and we should give it credit for that.
Eddie Weller?
Yeah. One of the things I'm thinking about, too, that helps Houston is it has not gotten completely rimmed in. A lot of older major metropolitan centers, they were completely rimmed in and could not grow, and so they are cut off from future funding sources over time. The legislature and Houston working together on that with that ETJ that no one loves, the extraterritorial jurisdiction on there. But because of that, it's kept Houston from being cut off from future funding. So as it grows, as the metro grows, as the inner city, which is such an important part, that core, we still also have new suburban areas that are coming in, and we reap the benefits of being in the Houston metropolitan area, and we also then pay some for it as well. And so that has helped. I agree. Of major cities, there are few that work as well as Houston. I mean, we can complain and gripe because we want things to be perfect. But in reality, for a major urban center, we do really well.
Eddie Weller is director of the honors program at San Jacinto College, where he's also a professor of history. Paul Brace is chair of legal studies in the Department of Political Science at Rice University. Thank you both very much.
Enjoyed it.
Right.